The story of Isis and Osiris, who are rumoured to have emerged from the acacia tree, goes as follows. Even as they are born from the same womb, Isis and Osiris love one another. When they grow up, they become married, as many members of the family of deities in the Egyptian canon will. Osiris becomes the god of fertility, agriculture and the afterlife, and a cultural icon bringing new tools, agricultural techniques and laws with which to govern society. He teaches his people the arts and wins numerous battles with neighbouring kingdoms. He is credited with a great many advances in the everyday lives of ancient Egyptians, including but not limited to religious knowledge of the gods. As a fertility god, Osiris symbolises the rise and fall of the River Nile, and the myth surrounding him attests to the cyclical conceptualization of life, death, and renewal in the male heroic god. When Osiris ventures forth to extend the great deeds he has achieved in his own land, he places Isis at the seat of authority in his absence. Quickly, Osiris's brother Seth, who has also married their sister Nephis, moves to depose his brother after what he feels to have been a worthless existence in comparison with Osiris's great achievements. Seth's plan is as devious as it is wicked. He has a beautiful wooden chest made to the precise dimensions of his brother and holds a large banquet. There he challenges each guest to squeeze into the chest in order to win it as a gift. But when Osiris fits neatly inside, Seth hammers it shut, and after sealing it with lead, Osiris suffocates. The chest is then thrown into the Nile, where it floats to its resting place among the reeds. When Isis learns of her siblings' brutal murder, she hastens to find Osiris's body immediately. She finds it in a beautiful tamarisk tree, just one of many important and spiritually significant plants in Egyptian religion and law. The tree is so magnificent, in fact, that it has been cut down and is in use as the central post in the dining hall of a great king, the king of Byblos. Eventually, Isis makes her entrance into the king's palace, working as a maid to the queen. She is given the honoured task of nursing the queen's infant son. Each night, Isis places the child in a fire to ensure the child's immortality. But one night, the queen discovers what she is doing and, frightened, demands the child back. Isis then reveals herself to the queen, who helps her to retrieve the chest containing Osiris from the tree in the dining hall. However, upon opening the chest, Isis lets out such a stricken wail as to kill the baby she has been nursing instantly. Isis then takes the coffin out to the delta, where she performs a mystical act upon Osiris's corpse. Laying the chest down, she metamorphoses into a giant hawk and hovers, beating her wings majestically above the inert body until it is revived sufficiently enough to impregnate her. Their child, Horus, will begin the royal lineage in ancient Egypt. But for now, he has just been born in a swamp where Osiris has fallen, dead. Osiris is laid to rest in the swamp by Isis. The myth is laden with the symbolism of death and rebirth, and indeed soon Seth, who is out hunting wild boar at night, discovers Osiris in his coffin and goes berserk. Vowing to complete the task he had begun, Seth dismembers Osiris into 14 parts and scatters them across the land, up and down the Nile. This time, Isis is aided in her quest to find and reassemble her husband by Nephthys, her son Anubis, and by the moon god Thoth. They reassemble every part of his body except the penis, which has been eaten by a hungry fish. The search party create a replica of this and recompose Osiris's body. Anubis wraps his body in linen cloth and performs a series of rites that will go on to become the rites of the mummification process. Isis once again metamorphoses into a bird-like creature while she and Nephthys sing spells over the corpse until it is sufficiently enough revived to be passed on to the gods. Osiris now travels into the underworld. He has become one of the original dying gods, who is reborn in Horus, echoing the waxing and waning of the seasons, crops, the lunar cycle, and many other cyclical patterns of the material world. Osiris becomes the king of the underworld, weighing the hearts of the dead to decide whether they shall return to life or be entombed there indefinitely. Description of the illustration on page 74. A large stone relief sculpture depicting Osiris, Isis, and Horus is shown in black and white with many hieroglyphs etched into the stone between the figures. The caption reads, "Archaeological evidence of the worship of Isis and Osiris begins between the 3rd to 2nd millennia BCE. Isis on the right and Osiris in the middle are pictured here with Horus on the left." I will only add that on Osiris's crown, she wears this kind of giant egg with two sort of horns holding it up, and that these are, I believe, thought to be the inspiration of the dentils in the classical and neoclassical Greek architecture. If you look for those, you'll see them very often around the sides of buildings as a detail. However, the tale is not yet complete. For as Horus assumes the position of king, he realizes that he has also inherited the jealous wrath of his uncle Seth. They both claim the throne, and an elaborate narrative follows, involving hearings and finally a 3-day battle, in which, according to Dr. Voth, Horus is said to have lost an eye, and Seth one testicle. Horus emerges triumphant. In asking Isis of the fate that should befall the defeated Seth, she advises clemency, which is often interpreted as a gesture that will ensure the continuity of the codependency of creation and destruction. The symbol Osiris bears upon his crown is strikingly similar to the palm capitals used in Egyptian architecture of the period. However, it is in fact a reed. In order to contextualize the narrative of Isis, Osiris, and the family of deities involved in the cyclical act of death and rebirth, it is necessary to take a broader look at the archetypal forms involved in the story. Archetypes, especially for the psychoanalyst Carl Jung, are symbols or images which recur throughout human history, and as such resonate in both the conscious and unconscious mind. The Garden of Paradise is one such archetype, as are gateways to other worlds, and indeed a mystical tree of life. The precise significance of an archetype changes across time. Therefore, ascribing lineages to ideas is a particularly tricky exercise that also runs the risk of entering the colonial mindset, wherein material facts come to substantiate what is actually the subjective bias of the researcher. Until this section of the book, the period of history concerning origin narratives involving the Garden of Paradise has barely touched upon events and artifacts that occur in the period after the first surviving documentation in written form. Ricochet will now depart from prehistory. I am about to bring the very earliest evidence of a sacred or holy tree into this book, because, as alluded to above, the very earliest records of holy trees are in fact palm trees. Palm trees have found themselves at the center of mystical, religious, economic, and political attention since the beginning of written history. It is also likely that as the earliest collective dwelling is evidenced in the Middle Eastern Fertile Crescent, brackets modern-day Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Israel, Palestine, Jordan, Egypt, the southeastern regions of Turkey, and the western fringes of Iran, close brackets. Palm trees very likely provided shelter and sustenance as the largest trees to grow in that region. I therefore acknowledge that the primary significance of the palm tree as a plant was probably its life-gathering fertility, but that many other factors must have also played into its canonization. After all, there were many other plants and trees in the Fertile Crescent, as the name suggests. Palm trees and palm tree motifs actually emerge in the archaeological record some 7,500 years prior to the Egyptian pyramid texts, in the 10th millennia BCE. However, two small details concerning the chronology of Egyptian mythology and the use of palm tree motifs should be mentioned to avoid confusion when consulting this and other texts. The first evidence of Osiris worship has been found at 2500 BCE. However, it is believed that he was worshipped much earlier, meaning that as a foundational myth which supports the beginning of the royal bloodline, the chronology of myths and artifacts does still cohere. People had been worshipping this myth for many hundreds of years prior to the year 2500 BCE. Secondly, though it is clearly a pivotal origin narrative, it appears to scholars that the story was only alluded to within the pyramid texts. Remember, these are dated circa 2400 to 2300 BCE. Though the first records of writing systems are around 3300, as referenced above. We know this because the story was only first compiled in its entirety by the Greek biographer and essayist Plutarch, who was born in the 1st century of the Common Era, brackets CE. Footnote 4. Quote, "The most complete version of the Isis and Osiris story comes actually from Plutarch, a Roman writer from the 1st century CE. It seems odd to us that in thousands of years no one in Egypt bothered to write down the most popular myth of all times. But it's possible that because it was so well known, there was never any need to write it down." Unquote. Ibid Dr. Voth, the goddess, Isis and Osiris. So again, the telling of the myth, who told it and why, becomes a kind of mythological event in itself, and I will discuss this and the god Apollo in much more detail shortly. Why? Because Apollo, with Isis and Osiris before him, certainly knew a thing or two about the connection between other realms of reality and the material world of us mortals. To recap, Isis and Osiris are critical to our understanding of human expressions of faith and worship in relationship to life, death and renewal between the late Neolithic (prehistoric) ancient and later Greek periods of human history. Though it is tempting to allot all forms of fertility worship to the Egyptians, this would be a gross error, as although trees and vegetation clearly play their role in the symbolism and imagery of Egyptian art, so, too, do sacred palm trees play their role in the archaeological evidence prior and parallel to Egyptian religion. Thus, it would be more appropriate to describe the relationship between the following two examples of holy tree worship in the Fertile Crescent as correlative rather than causative. My inquiries reveal an enormous amount of replication with variation on the palm tree motif. Graphic description of the illustration on page 79. The motif is incredibly pared down. At the base, we find two incomplete spirals evolving or unfurling to the left and to the right. On top of this kind of stump is another object which seems to be a further development of those spirals insofar as you can see that they are spirals. Again, these are very, very simple, very, very old drawings of engravings. And on the crown of this second object, at the top you have what could be the most sort of abstracted form of the palmette, which is a pair of small triangles with sort of sun rays shooting out the top, almost like a kind of perfectly cut stone depicting lines of departure. And the caption reads, 10th century BCE, ornamental orthostat, Palace of King Capra, after Shiloh. For example, the Prophet Muhammad stated, "When one of you is fasting, they should break their fast with dates." In the Middle Eastern tradition, the date palm tree is said to signify hospitality and peace. Rather than alluding to a secret or hidden meaning, the association of the date palm with sites of worship and burial is integral to the date palm's presence within Islam. I will demonstrate the palm tree's recurrence at sites of spiritual, religious, financial, and state power. The evidence ranges between the 10th millennia up to the year 2016 and will no doubt continue long thereafter. My hypothesis is that some instances of this replicating cultural motif will be best described, within the parameters of my own biological models, as mutations, while others will be more appropriately characterized as part of epigenetic activation and silencing, or to place these patterns in contemporary terms, erasure. My investigation will render some examples of this cultural germline as a simulacra, or distortions of the real. Despite or because of this artificial quality, the motif of the sacred palm tree is still widely used by power, wittingly or unwittingly. It has been my task to render this cultural germline in a more apparent, accessible manner. One of the central questions to every artwork that I have created has been accessible to whom? In some ways, this book is an elaborate extension of that question. Only here it presumes to be qualified to ask certainly more questions, if not more probing ones, that can be raised by a single artwork while remaining accessible. A simulacrum is by definition an exaggerated rendition of the real, and has a long philosophical history in itself to which I will attempt to contribute. If I take my point of departure from the visual evidence displayed above, of the timeline of a garden of paradise as evoked by the sacred palm tree, to begin around the 10th millennium, it looks something like the images on the following pages. Descriptions of the illustrations on page 80 and 81. On page 80, the caption reads, 10th century BCE, ornamental orthostat, Palace of King Khepra, after Ibid Dantin. The above examples explain the spiralling volutes of classical architecture, which, filtered through thousands upon thousands of replications with variation, represent the fruits of the date palm. The leaves are present in the bushy protrusion at the crown of the design. So, in order to add to this, what I have realized in the interceding period is that actually the dates are quite visible in the very first carving or engraving of a sacred date palm tree. And so the spirals which we see repeated coming from the trunk of the palm tree, which are not the leaves, because the leaves are represented by the palmette in the crown, I think are probably more a kind of sacred depiction of the unfurling of the universe and a completely different relationship to what we understand as time, which is accessed through the deep meditation of the practitioner. So remember, for example, a few pages ago we had Muhammad sitting at the base of the palm tree and fasting, only eating dates to survive for 40 days. So there's been a number of personal, spiritual, and text-based kind of like revelations, let's say, or realizations that have led me to this. And there's a paper that I wrote which talks about the recent claims about UFOs by the American military, which gets into this particularly. Okay, so I'm not going to go off on a digress about that. The illustration on the right is, again, a very, very pared down, simple sketch of a kind of spiral shape coming off of a trunk. And the caption reads, simple leafy systems, ceramic, 4th and 3rd millennium, Babylonia, which is Sumer and Akkad, after Ibid Dantin. And the reason I put those next to each other is because they are 7,000 years apart. So this is the kind of time scale which we're able to map the sacred plants and particularly the sacred date palm tree across. The illustrations on the following page I will get to next episode, because we are now out of time for this particular broadcast. Thank you so much for joining us both. Khaled is going to play us out for the last few minutes, but you can catch more of these broadcasts on 88.4 FM Berlin and 90.7 Potsdam by tuning in on the first and third Wednesdays of the month from 1 p.m. to 2 p.m. and then a new show again at 1 a.m. till 2 a.m. that night. Good luck to all of you out there. I hope you have a peaceful night. I hope you have peaceful rest, and that you bring yourself into the new day refreshed and wide awake for the new cycle. Thank you again for joining me, for listening, and goodbye.